Hi everyone, it's Dave Steele again here from Mosaic Nonprofit Consulting, proud partner of the Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools. I decided to add a brief video to the end of our coursework on strategic planning for charter schools in light of everything that has changed since we put that course together back in the summer of 2019. Now, as I sit here in September of 2020, we're about 6 months into an unprecedented global pandemic that has altered every aspect of life for all of us and has led to just tremendous economic and social upheaval throughout all kinds of communities all across the state and really all over the country and indeed the entire world. So it's important for us, in trying to ensure that we have, the most pertinent information and guidance for strategic planning, which is a critical board function. It's important for us to consider, well, how do we continue to serve that function of strategic planning during extraordinarily changing and uncertain times? So this is a very brief overview that does not replace the coursework on strategic planning, but just kind of adds to it and gives you a few more nuggets to think about as we consider strategic planning during uncertain times. So I think we can all relate to the situation that we are in currently, being in the great unknown. So picture being out on a boat out in the water, and you can't tell which way the shoreline is. So imagine that you are deciding which direction to go. You really don't know which way to go because you can't see the shoreline. This really symbolizes in many ways what we're all going through as leaders during this period of time, because we don't know where the shoreline is. We don't know how long this situation will last. We don't know the long-term and even short-term ramifications of this situation, even though we are 6 months into it. But the great unknown ultimately, can be not exactly overcome, but we can mitigate it and we can work through it together as board members within the context of strategic planning by focusing and doubling down in many ways on our mission and our vision. Keep coming back to that mission and vision and through, through a framework that I'm about to provide to you here, a strategic framework, just have more productive conversations about where our organization is headed while we're out here in the great unknown. So what we're going to cover today is the board's role during extraordinary times, strategic planning during these times, and considering different scenarios for what this situation means for our organization. Now, one of the great things about charter schools in Wisconsin, really one of the great things about our state in general, is that we're incredibly diverse. We have small schools serving rural communities that face very, very different set of circumstances during these times than schools in urban areas around our state. But what I'm about to talk about really can be applied to really any kind of uncertain situation, and any time where we really have to kind of come together as a team, as a board, to support and shepherd our organizations through uncertainty. So now more than ever, it's important for us to understand that from the perspective of a board member or board governance, a charter school really ultimately is a deal between a state-sanctioned authorizer and an independent nonprofit organization. So, we provide results in exchange for autonomy. The authorizer grants our charter school, our nonprofit organization, freedom from, the typical, rules and regulations that govern traditional public schools. But in exchange for that autonomy, we provide results. And this is all baked into a contract. Now, as board members, it's important for us to understand given everything that is going on with crazy circumstances and unforeseen circumstances, the nature of that might change. Autonomy might change during during this period of time. What does autonomy mean for us in the COVID-19 reality? What if our school district is, at some point in the near future, essentially closes down all in-person learning, but we want to continue in person? Do we have the autonomy to do that? I would argue as charter schools we should. But of course, the safety of our communities is foremost. And then results. Now, normally we articulate results as test scores, but this disaster has really thrown our entire testing program out of whack. It hit in the spring of 2020, right around the time that we were set to do testing. So there will be changes in how we sort of prove results. So as board members, it's especially important for us to understand what that contract says, what the parameters of that contract are, and how things might change during this time. It's also important for us to take a step back and consider, of course, our basic roles and responsibilities. And this is a review from earlier course content, and you will see it on the Buzz, the course materials on Buzz. But these are, per board source, are 10 roles and responsibilities of being a nonprofit board member. And I've highlighted in green here the ones that we need to be especially cognizant of when times are tough. Supporting and evaluating our chief executive, ensuring effective planning, monitoring and strengthening our programs and services, protecting assets, ensuring legal and ethical integrity, and enhancing the organization's public standing. So I'll get into greater detail about what this means. But our staff, our executive leadership, are making some very difficult decisions right now. They're probably hearing from parents and community members from all corners of your community about what this means, about what this whole situation means for our families, for working families that don't have the ability to stay home necessarily. A lot of that stress then goes directly onto our school leaders. And as board members, we're here to support. Now, what does support look like? We can talk about how we expand on that definition of support. Ensuring effective planning, and I'll get into much greater detail about what strategic planning looks like during uncertain times, and thinking about taking a step back from strategic planning and thinking more in terms of a strategic framework and more short-term scenarios for how we're going to get through this in a strong position. Monitor and strengthen programs and services. Again, coming back to our mission, we as a charter school, we exist for a reason. We exist to provide a unique service to families and kids who need it the most. Now, in today's day and age, with everything going on, that might look different how we actually pursue that. But how do we still monitor and strengthen and ensure that we're providing that value? Protecting assets, providing financial oversight. This disaster will have huge ramifications for nonprofit finances. It might have ramifications for your enrollment. Might have ramifications for private fundraising. Both actually, believe it or not, positive and negative. Ensuring legal and ethical integrity and enhancing the organization's public standing. This really is about how we communicate as a team, as one, to our communities. And I'll get into that in a bit. So planning for an uncertain future. Now imagine, put yourself in the position of really your own household, right? And you may have put some big decisions on hold. I know in my family, my household, we certainly have. Maybe you were planning on buying a new house, and moving, to a different house. Well, you're going to put that on hold, right? Maybe expanding your family to, deciding whether or not to have another child. You're going to put that on hold. And a lot of people are doing this. And why do we do that? Why do we put our plans on hold during an uncertain time? Well, that's because we don't really know what is going on currently. We don't really quite know what is happening in the immediate future. We have an uncertain time frame and unforeseen consequences. With limited information, we have to rethink how we plan for the future. If we don't, how are we supposed to look at what's going to happen 5 years from now if we're not sure what's going to happen 5 months from now, or even, maybe even 5 weeks from now, with how rapidly things seem to be changing with the crisis. And the board's role during uncertain times is more important than ever to consider the proper lanes for decision making. Now, this is a handy resource from BoardSource, which talks about board decisions and executive decisions, and then that gray area in between of shared decisions between the board and the executive. Now, there is no clear right or wrong answer for every decision that you make. Some decisions, there will be a bit of a gray area, but the key thing is that you're on the same page as a board and staff about whose decisions are which and whose lanes are which. And during uncertain times, that might change a little bit. I'll get into a few examples of decisions here and how the uncertain times might change that dynamic about board and executive decision making. Now, technical considerations for virtual learning. Now, if this was the non-COVID-19 reality, I would say very clearly that is a staff decision that the board provides advice and input on. However, in our current reality, virtual learning might be the critical mode by which you deliver on your mission. I think that it enhances the board's role, not necessarily in taking a decision-making role on that, but being much more deliberate about advising and overseeing and performing your governance function over a decision like that. Because, with virtual learning, what platforms are we going to use? How are we going to ensure equity in how families and kids access it? There's, in urban areas, we have great digital divide between families that have computers at home and those that lack computers at home. In rural areas, tremendous divide between families in town that might have access to broadband and families further out that don't. Now, those are, considerations that can get a little technical, but are part and parcel of the mission. So it is important for boards to be aware and support. Staff policies for safely reopening in-person school. Now, normally, staff policies, HR, the Human Resources Handbook, that is a staff decision to make. That really is not appropriate for the board to decide. But given today's reality of what we're all kind of dealing with together, that it's given the stakes involved, in keeping your staff safe, because heaven forbid if you have an outbreak at your school that could have huge consequences. You could end up having to not do in person. Maybe here in Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee Health Department is taking a very proactive role in reviewing safety plans for schools, of all kinds of schools throughout the city, private and charter schools. So that is one that might fall more in that middle bucket of shared decisions between the board and the executive. Hiring IT support staff. So this is one that I still would say would be under the staff purview. But again, the IT people that keep the engines running are going to be even more critical and are more critical now than at any period of time. So it's something that a board might just kind of look at in a cursory glance. Takes on a little more importance during this reality. So as we think about best ways to serve our function as governance board members during extraordinary times, I kind of put our main areas of focus under three big buckets, and that is support, understand, and communicate. Support, understand, and communicate. And showing up to every board meeting, every board interaction, every time you communicate with other board members or staff members, how am I able to support, understand, and communicate? So under the support bucket, I would remind us that extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And we have to think broadly about ways that the board and community can support the school during this time. Think outside the box. Maybe you have a connection with somebody in the technology field that can provide a critical resource to helping with that shift to virtual learning or critical advice. Maybe you hadn't really thought of this previously, but it occurs to you as a board member that you can provide some value with that. Like I said, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. Be prepared to be more engaged as a board member. This, folks, is what we signed up for. We signed up for community service, and our communities need us more than ever. But always respect that boundary between board governance and management. And refer back to that chart that I presented earlier. If there's a decision that is to be made, have open communication about lanes and don't overstep. Now, I think a lot of times when times are tough, we want to help, and we wouldn't be board members if we weren't interested in helping. That's what we're here to do. So when times get tough, we want to help. So we think of ways that we can help. But if that's not communicated adequately to the staff and to the executive, that can end up causing more problems and more distraction or work for our staff to deal with. But still help, but respect that boundary. Understand, listen to the community that your school serves. Understand the school's mission and how it may be affected by the crisis, and understand the data. So our communities are in great change right now. There's places around the state that are, communities that are heavily dependent on one industry. I'm thinking very specifically of places that are dependent on the tourism or the paper industry in a lot of parts of our state. And, this disaster, this pandemic has huge ramifications for those industries. So understand the community that you serve, understand what they're going through, what their concerns are. Because if you don't understand the community that you serve, it's very hard to then, think of the best way that you can serve them. Understand the school's mission and how it may be affected by the crisis. And I'll get into the mission and vision in a second. And understand the data and the limitations of the data. Now, I said earlier that we're here to provide results to our state-sanctioned authorizer as part of our contract. But those results, the way that we quantify those, has taken a great shift in this COVID-19 reality around testing. So understand what the data are, understand what the limitations of the data are. How do we know that we're still fulfilling our mission? How do we know that we're closing gaps in achievement between groups of students if we can't measure that? Now, there's no easy answer to that, but be aware of what the data are telling us and what they can't tell us at this point. And lastly, communicate. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate consistently with your school leader. Regular check-ins. It can make a huge difference. Even if it's, how are you doing and how can I help? How are you doing and how can we help? That can go a long, long way. Shifting gears here and speaking to our school leaders that are watching this, you all are dealing with an extraordinary situation. And, in many ways, our schools are on the front lines of, the great challenges that this COVID-19 pandemic has brought on. And that comes with a lot of stress. So as board members, we can ask ourselves, even just a check-in can make a huge difference. And out of that conversation could come any number of leads and possible ways that we can help. And, communicate with one voice, board and staff. We're going to have to make some tough choices as we go through the 2020-2021 school year. In a lot of places around our state, it's still entirely virtual. A lot of places in our state, it's entirely in person. All of those things could change. Hopefully they change for the better, but it might not. And as things change, we're going to have, we're going to have to pivot and adjust as organizations. Now, it's okay to have differences of opinion. In fact, that's a sign of a healthy board. You want to have differences of opinion within the boardroom. But, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. When you have differences of opinion within that boardroom, and then it's time to, make the decision and then vote on it as a board, whether it be to reduce in-person school or maybe go back to entirely in-person if things get better. Even if you're that board member that said, no, I disagree with this entirely, as a board, you communicate as one and say, this is our board's policy, this is our school's policy, and that's what we're doing. The last thing you want to have among your community, which is already facing tremendous uncertainty, you don't want to add to that by saying, here's the board's decision, but this one group over here, the 3 or 4 board members, were not on board with that. And they're saying that they're going to challenge it. So then that just creates more uncertainty about then as a parent, okay, well, how do I plan for what this means for me? Now, I spent a lot of time throughout this course talking about strategic planning for nonprofits. And during these times, I want to encourage us to take a step back and think less about a strategic plan and more about a strategic framework. Because, a strategic plan looks into the future, 3 to 5 year time span. We say, okay, in 5 years, we want to be here. And that's very difficult to do when it's difficult to look 5 years in the future. We don't even know what might happen 5 months in the future. And at this rate, even 5 weeks into the future, we don't know where things might break from a public health and an economy standpoint in our state. So now might not be the time to do a full-blown strategic plan, but you still need to meet as a board and consider how we help our organization see through this and how we position ourselves well for the future. So now might be actually a good time to think about a strategic framework. It articulates your vision and mission as a school, lays out clear short-term strategies, and articulates long-term goals and strategies to achieve them so that when the dust settles and we're back to this new normal, we're positioned well for the future and know where we're headed. So I'm going to go back to this imagery of the curtain rod because, now more than ever, your mission and vision is that, those shower hooks on the top of your shower curtain. If they go to the left, then your entire organization goes to the left. If they go to the right, your entire organization goes to the right. Your mission and vision statements say, here's why we exist, and here's how we do what we do. And that has huge ramifications for how you spend money, the folks that you hire, and so on and so on, the curriculum program that you adopt, the instructional strategies that you're all about, the facility that you're in. It all hangs off of that mission and vision. So, this is a bit of a review, but your vision and your vision statement has fewer words, it's aspirational, it's your why. Your mission statement has more words, it's operational, and it's your how. Now, I'm going to get into, and you will have seen this before, my personal favorite vision and mission statement from the Rockland schools in Sacramento. So we envision a school community that inspires its students to excel academically, pursue their passions, and impact the world with excellence. Our mission statement, Rockland Academy Family of Schools, provides a distinct educational program strengthened by community and parent partnerships to achieve high standards, rich core content, and innovative learning. And I think this is a great example because our vision statement says, okay, this is big, bold, and aspirational, and not really measurable. We're not going to sit down and say, inspires the students to excel, pursue their passions, impact the world. How do you really measure that? That's so far off in the future, but it's still really important to have because it says this is what this is our true north. It's our why. Now, our vision statement talks about how we're going to do it, and this is eminently measurable, right? Distinct educational programs strengthened by community and parent partnerships, high standards, rich core content, and innovative learning. Well, we can define what those things are. And if we can define what those things are, we can also talk about and have very good, robust conversations as a board about how we still stick to that when the whole world takes a left turn and goes in a different direction, as we've seen over the last 6 months. So as we think about a strategic framework, and we want to drill down into more short-term strategies for how we see ourselves through this crisis. Starting with our mission statement and with a deep understanding of our organization, we want to identify what are our key drivers of our mission, our operations, and our finances. So I'm going to get back to Rockland Academy here, my favorite example in California. So we have a distinct educational program strengthened by community and parent partnerships to achieve high standards, rich core content, and innovative learning. So our key drivers, those are those pieces of the puzzle. So those are programs, work streams that are critical for us to deliver on that mission. Now, in the case of Rockland Academy, I'd say that looking at this, distinct educational program is a key driver. Community and parent partnerships is a key driver. Our standards and content and our innovative learning is a key driver. Now, we've identified what those key drivers are of our mission. Now, what are our key drivers of operations? Our facility, transportation. Do we have a transportation program? Are we contracted with our school district to get kids there, or are parents bringing kids on their own? What are our financial drivers? Now, as charter schools, and I'd hazard that 90% of you out there, your number one driver for finances is going to be enrollment. But maybe you do have a well-developed fund development operation where, close on the list, after enrollment is private fundraising. So we identify what are those drivers, and we consider then, as a board, how important are they and how exposed are they to risk? So how critical are they to doing what we do, and how risky, what is the chances that we won't be able to deliver on those because of this, the reality that we find ourselves in. Now, as a board, we go through and say, okay, we've identified where our drivers are, we know what the importance are, we know what the risk is. So we say in-person learning, for this imaginary school here, key driver. I think in-person learning will be a key driver for almost all of us, unless we're a virtual school. Now, as a board, we talk about how important is that for our model. Now, in the case of Rockland, and I'm not, a member of that board, but I would say, well, given what we know about what our mission is and given what we know about our school, it's probably a medium importance. We could, obviously we're not a virtual school, but we could still deliver the value that we need to deliver without it being in person. Now, obviously the risk to that is very high during today's crisis, especially in urban areas in our state. Now, it might be a bit different in more rural areas around our state. But you might have risk related to, the economic impact of this, even if you're not directly impacted by the public health aspect, although we all are impacted by the public health aspect, of course. Now, our hands-on field learning for this imaginary hypothetical school, the board looked at it and said, no, this is really high. Like, we can't deliver the value that we uniquely bring, as reflected in our mission statement, without it. And of course, the risk is now high, right? So that's a high important, high risk driver. For this imaginary school, transportation is low importance because, we rely on parents to deliver the students themselves, either drive or walk them. But the risk is high because we're located in an urban area very highly dependent on the city transit system, which is of a high risk to being disrupted because of what's happening right now. And then for this hypothetical, we have financial drivers, enrollment very high, of course. Now the board looked at it and said, well, in conversation with the staff, we feel like our enrollment is still on track. We're not going to be impacted by this. That might not be the case for you. With great upheaval in our communities, parents might make different decisions, and maybe we are at risk of losing enrollment because of this. External fundraising for this particular school was low, and the risk that they had determined was medium. So as a board, we want to put our drivers into categories, and to simplify this, we're looking at them as, red, yellow, and green. So red light is a high importance, high risk. Now for this particular school I was talking about earlier, the hands-on experiential learning aspect of it, very high importance, very difficult for us to do what we uniquely do, but it is also very high risk. So we ask ourselves as a board, is there a plan to manage this risk? Is there a plan under different best case scenarios that we could bring that back sooner rather than later if things take a turn for the better? What do we do if things get even worse? Is there how do we know that we can still fulfill that part of our mission? Is immediate action required right now? And I would encourage you at every single board meeting to think about that. Now, for the yellow and the green ones, this is all about contingency plans for when and if this becomes a red issue. And I would encourage you to spend more time on the yellow ones than the green ones, at least at each given time, and continually reevaluate every board meeting. Are we still saying that this is high importance or high risk? And this can help us manage in these very tricky circumstances where things seem to be changing a lot. Now, this can be a framework for having those very difficult conversations that none of us as board members really want to have, the things that we really have to have conversation about. What if our enrollment, which is very high, gets into high risk? And what if we do lose enrollment and we see a tremendous financial hit as a result? What is our contingency plan for if that happens? What are the different scenarios by which we might think about reducing our administrative overhead? And again, no one wants to have these conversations, but we wouldn't be doing our role, our critical role as board members, if we didn't have those types of conversations. And this is a framework by which we can have the conversations that we really need to be having when we need to be having them, so that it's not a free-for-all or a little less structured. It really is a framework for having more deliberate conversations. So, really what this is scenario planning. We're continually reassessing the key drivers, and our guiding questions are, what will the worst case, medium, and best case scenarios mean for our key drivers moving forward? Now, the best case scenario from where I sit in the city of Milwaukee might be a different best case scenario from where you're sitting in a different part of the state. All of our communities are different, and we're experiencing this situation in different ways. In my community, the public health consideration might be front and center above other considerations like the economic consideration. It might be the obverse in your community. So as a board, have a deliberate conversation about, okay, well, best case scenario is we're through this by March and we're back to normal, maybe even January. That'd be great. Worst case scenario is it never ends, or there's something even worse that comes down the pike. As we look at the different kinds of scenarios, what does that mean for our drivers moving forward? And that just helps us then continually evaluate what's important for us to be talking about at any given time. And then what actions can we take when and if the times come that our drivers become that condition red? What is the risk that something would become condition red? And what do we do, if and when that happens? Now, confidentiality is going to be extremely important here. And I know that for charter schools, it's a bit different because we do have open meetings records. You want to be able to speak frankly as board members. And, when you talk about the worst case scenarios, just be very, very clear that, this doesn't mean that we have a plan to cut staff or close a building or whatnot. We're saying that if this happens and if that happens, then this would be an item for our consideration. And as much as we can have open and confidential conversations, obviously the better. But still embracing that spirit of transparency with our communities. I would embrace transparency with our communities in terms of the process, but not necessarily the granular detail, because you don't want rumors spreading, oh, I heard that XYZ charter school is going to close if this thing doesn't get better. You don't want that kind of stuff. But you want to reassure the community that you're serving that you, as a board, are considering all different scenarios on the table to ensure that our kids are safe, our communities are safe, we're still pursuing our mission. And that really gets to the communication aspect of it as well. So I hope this was helpful for everybody. I want to thank the school leaders specifically for everything that you're doing during this time. And I want to thank the board members for stepping up and, really serving and doing, providing that essential function during this time. It's not easy, but the Works Network in general, and I specifically am here to help. As a Works Partner school, you have access to technical assistance, which I'm prepared to provide as the other partners throughout the network. You have awesome national resources. You have local resources like myself, state-based resources. So please take advantage. Here is my contact information. Give me a holler anytime. And even if it is just a quick question, I can, with the magic of Zoom, I can, attend a board meeting really anywhere throughout the state. So happy to do so, happy to help any way that I can. And again, we'll get through this, but thank you for all that you do.